All right. We are ready to get started. You get me solo tonight. Kelly's out of town for work, so you're excited that I'm solo? Oh, okay, thanks. Hey, so we're halfway through our Tighten the Knot series. This is week 5, and so we're going to get started with some rules. Rule number 1, be engaged. You have to talk, especially because tonight we're going to talk about communication. So it's going to be important on the night that we talk about communication that you communicate. So when we ask you a question, it's not rhetorical. We actually want you to answer it. If we give you an activity to do, we actually want you to do it. So we're talking about marriage. So most of these questions, I think all of the questions tonight are directed to you specifically as a couple. Rule number next, we want you to be kind, okay? We're all learning together. No one is a marriage expert in the room, so make sure your responses, your conversations are marked with kindness. The last few weeks, we've been talking about some uncomfortable things. Tonight, we're going to talk about something that's not necessarily uncomfortable, but it will probably cause some tension because we're going to talk about how well you do not communicate in your marriage. So feel free, if you need to spread out in the room, if you need to have a private conversation, that is totally okay. Rule number 3, this is a discussion-based study, but we don't have all night. So we've given you some blanks on your paper. We want you to fill out those blanks and then have that dialogue with your spouse at the table. And if you need more information or need more resources, we have all those in the Church Center app that you can continue to talk about all week long. So we're going to jump into the study tonight with a couple true-false questions. So true-false. Answer each statement with your spouse. What I say is more important than how I say it. True or false? When we are in sync, I expect you can read my mind. True or false? The goal of good communication is to convey information accurately. True or false? So answer those questions amongst yourself. There's also copies of those questions on the top of your conversation guide. So, what I say is more important than how I say it. True or false? When we are in sync, I expect you can read my mind. True or false? The goal of good communication is to convey information accurately. True or false? All right. Of all the reasons that we counsel couples, communication is by far the number one reason that couples struggle. A breakdown in communication is the number one problem we face in our marriage. A successful marriage depends on how well spouses send and receive messages, as well as how well they can say what they mean and understand what they hear. Many times, couples struggle to express what they want or need in the relationship, and this breeds disappointment that makes spouses build defenses and become guarded in their communication. As a result, couples stop confiding in each other, and they wall themselves off and withdraw emotionally from the relationship. Couples' ability to communicate is the single most important contributor to a stable and satisfying marriage. Communication is the lifeblood of marriage. One of the most important skills you can learn is how to talk so your spouse will listen, and how to listen so your spouse will talk. So we're going to talk tonight about communication. We're going to start off with a couple connect question. So I want you to discuss with your spouse what are the top 3 topics that we talk about on a regular basis. What are the top 3 topics that you talk about with your spouse on a regular basis? All right. So we actually have a workbook exercise for you to do this week that's called How Well Do You Communicate? And there is a men's version and a women's version of this workbook exercise. So this will help you build your communication skills by being aware of how well you actually do or do not communicate. As we unpack communication tonight, we have to recognize that non-talking is not a lack of communication, but actually a form of communication that sends negative messages. Silence is a powerful communicator. So, if you are unwilling to talk, that actually says quite a lot about the communication and health of your marriage. Silence is not the cause of poor communication. The fear of pain is. Human nature is for us to seek pleasure rather than pain. We want to actually avoid pain. But people typically avoid pain first before they begin to seek pleasure. That's why it's important to know when we try to understand why we have a communication breakdown in marriage. Most breakdowns in communication occur when we try to avoid the emotional pain of feeling inadequate, vulnerable, or fearful. Early on in marriage, we seem to talk about everything. Think about when you were dating or engaged. You talked about all kinds of things. Somewhere along the line, especially after children come along, those heart-to-heart sessions lessen along with the intimacy that they helped create. A way to build emotional intimacy in our relationship is to have 10 minutes a day of quality conversation. Now, here's what we mean by that. Many couples think they communicate well because they sort out things like who's going to pick up the kids or who's making dinner tonight, how we're going to pay the bills or what the family calendar is going to look like this week. This is not the communication that you need in your marriage. Now, don't get me wrong, figuring out schedules is a very important part of life, but it is not what we call quality communication. Research shows that there is a link between happy marriages and self-disclosure. Self-disclosure is the sharing of your private feelings, fears, doubts, and perceptions with your spouse. The problem is that as your marriage matures, self-disclosure often stops entirely. Did my slide not advance? Okay, I was like, I'm looking at the thing, seeing it's not advanced. Oftentimes, as our marriage matures, our self-disclosure actually stops. The solution to this problem is to intentionally focus your conversations on the 5% of your life that you don't discuss with others. This is what we mean by quality conversations, right? I can talk about the weather with anyone. I'm probably not going to talk about disciplining my kids with most people. I'm not going to talk about sex with anyone, right? So what we want you to do in order to have healthy communication in your marriage is to have quality communication around the 5% of things that you don't discuss with other people in your life. So here's another couple connect question to discuss with your spouse. What is one private feeling that you have not yet told your spouse? And what is one fear or doubt you have been struggling with? What's one private feeling that you have not yet told your spouse? And what is one fear or doubt that you have been struggling with? All right, we're going to start off looking at page 12 of your SYMBIS assessment. This page covers the communication patterns and preferences you each have. So what I want you to do is I want you to look at these top 2 paragraphs, one about each of you. This is your communication style. So I want you to ask these questions. Is it surprising to you? Do you feel like you agree with what is stated about yourself? Do you feel like you agree with what is stated about your partner? Okay? Again, every time you read a paragraph or something on this assessment, if there's something that doesn't apply to you, doesn't describe you well, just take your pen, put a line through it. That's okay. There's no perfect assessment, but we want you to read through each of the paragraphs, read through your paragraph, read through your spouse's. Is there anything in it that surprises you? Do you feel like you agree with what is stated about you and your partner? Discuss. All right. Now, if we're going to talk about communication, we're going to need to talk about some miscommunication styles as well. There are 4 miscommunication styles that people fall into when they feel threatened. Okay, so we're going to go through each one of these, and the question that you need to ask yourself is, which one of these is you? Because you will fall into at least one of these 4 categories whenever you feel threatened. So that means when there's an argument in your marriage, there's tension in the marriage, when you feel threatened, you're going to gravitate towards one of these 4 miscommunication styles. The first one is placating. The placator is a yes man or woman. They're often eager to please and apologetic. They want to keep the peace at any price, and the price they pay for this feeling is a feeling of worthlessness. Placators need to know that it's okay to disagree. The second is blaming. The blamer is a fault finder who criticizes relentlessly and likes to speak in generalizations. So they say things like, "You never do anything right." Okay? That's what a blamer does. Inside, blamers feel unworthy or unloved. They're angry because they might not get what they want. What blamers need is to learn to speak on their own behalf without attacking others in the process. The third is computing. The computer is super reasonable, calm, collected, and never admits mistakes. And they expect people to conform and perform for them. Computers need someone to ask them how they feel about specific things. The fourth style of miscommunication is distracting. The distractor resorts to irrelevancies under stress. They avoid eye contact and direct answers. Distractors need to know that they are safe, not helpless, and that problems can be solved and conflicts can be resolved. So the question is, which one are you? When you feel threatened, are you more likely to placate? Are you more likely to blame? Are you more likely to compute or distract? Discuss with your spouse. Which one of these 4 do you think you are more of? You might be more than one, but all of us at least fall into one category when we feel threatened. Okay, so the reality is, it's very possible that you're more than one of these. It's possible that you are all 4 of these. Here's what I'll tell you. You don't want to be any of these. Okay? So the next time you find yourself commenting with your spouse by placating, blaming, computing, or distracting, remember that you're probably feeling hurt or stressed about something. And you need to find a way to make it safe for both of you to talk. So the reality is, if you are having a discussion with your spouse, or in reality, with anyone, and you begin placating, blaming, computing, or distracting, what that should be is a warning signal to you that you are hurt or stressed, and so you need to change something in order to have a safe conversation with both of you. We actually have a workbook exercise that you're going to do this week to help with that called the daily temperature reading. Okay? So this is going to help your partner you and your partner maintain a easy flow of communication with the big and little things going on in your life. This is a really interesting activity to go through, especially if you do it more than one day, okay? Because it asks you to name something you appreciate, to share some new information. It asks you to ask your partner if there's something you don't understand that you can explain, and also ask for a complaint or a request or hopes that you have. So if you do something like this over the course of multiple days and multiple weeks, you're going to actually find out that your communication is going to improve because you're giving information every single day that will hopefully stave off fights later that day because of miscommunication. Okay? We're going to look back at your SYMBIS assessment on page 12, and we're going to look at the middle section, how you like your spouse to communicate with you. Okay? I want you to look over it, and I want you to select 2 of the 5 items that resonate with you the most. Okay? So you're going to look over it, you're going to select 2 of the 5 items that resonate with you the most. Then you're going to explain to your spouse why those 2 items are important to you. And if you can, use specific examples so your spouse can see how clearly and how important it is for them to communicate to you in this way. Okay? 2 of the 5 that are the most important, then you're going to explain to your spouse why they're so important, and you're going to use some examples so they can see clearly how to do this for you. All right. Now, I want you to talk about what specific example of how you can communicate in a way that your spouse appreciates this week. So talk with your spouse. One of the 2 that they indicated should be one of the ones you should work on this week. And give an example of how you can communicate in a way your spouse appreciates. I'll give you an example. So on Kelly's list, one of hers is to be relaxed, unhurried, and fully present. Okay? Well, my to-do list is longer than my day. Okay? So that's a challenge for me. One of the ways I can do this, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later tonight, is to take this and put it somewhere away from me, okay? Because my phone dings, phone calls, text messages, emails, about every 5 minutes, okay? So if I am going to be relaxed, unhurried, and fully present, then that means at a specific time every night, I need to commit to take my phone and put it somewhere where I'm not going to constantly be answering those calls, texts, or emails. All right? So think about what is one specific example of how you can communicate in a way that your spouse appreciates this week. All right. We're going to continue in the conversation guide. Good communication is built first on who you are and only later on what you do. Before practicing communication techniques, you need to work on who you are as a person. So you can read the latest articles and books, or you can attend things like Roundtable, you can listen to podcasts, you can go see counselors, and they're all going to teach you good communication skills, which are good. But if you do not first focus on the qualities you possess as a spouse, your efforts in communication will not mean much. To enjoy rich communication and a rock-solid marriage, 3 personal qualities must be present: warmth, genuineness, and empathy. Warmth. Your partner came to you with a cluster of unacceptable qualities, some known, some that may still be discovered. Okay? So your partner has a whole bunch of qualities that are not good qualities to have as a spouse. Personal warmth is overlooking a blemish for the sake of the beauty behind it. The key to personal warmth is acceptance. Rather than evaluating or requiring change, you need to simply accept the thoughts, feelings, and actions of the person you love. Okay? Now, warmth does not mean approval of anything your spouse does, nor is it a kind of smothering feeling of forced or fake emotion. Warmth invites your partner to be who they are, relaxed, free, and at peace. And this lifts their confidence and keeps them from conforming their personality to what they think you want it to be. Okay? So, having warmth does not mean your spouse can do anything or act any way that they want. But it's also not a smothering feeling where you're trying to force them to fake emotions or qualities that they don't have. It's accepting your partner for who they are in a relaxed, free, and peaceful environment, and this will help them to not conform to who they think you want them to be. Unconditional warmth also invites God's grace into the soul of your marriage. When your partner feels sure that they can never be condemned by you for who they are, then no judgment can hurt them. God's grace has seeped into the fabric of your relationship, stopping the subtle and unhealthy marital pattern of your partner continually looking to you for your approval. Okay? Oftentimes, we condemn our partners because they're not who we think they should be. They don't live up to our standards or our expectations. Okay? When you create warmth in your relationship, you're creating an opportunity for grace. Okay? To exhibit the grace that God has shown you by not condemning them for who they are and not having them look to you for your approval as a person. Okay? Now, as a born-again believer, we want to accept each other for who we are, but not allow each other to stay that way. Okay? The Holy Spirit should be daily transforming you. You should look more and more like Jesus today than you did yesterday. Tomorrow you should be more like Jesus than you are today. Okay? So this is not an opportunity for you to just say, this is who I am, I can't change it, this is how God made me. No. God did not make you a sinner. Sin and your sin nature made you a sinner. Okay? God designed you to bring glory to Him. And so just accepting who you are and the sin that's in your life and the bad attitude you have is not acceptable. But it is also not acceptable for you as a spouse to push your spouse to be something that they are not and to have them look to you for approval on their actions. Okay? Does that make sense? This is a hard one because it's a balance. Jesus needs to change you. You're not changing your spouse. That's Jesus' job. Okay? The next one is genuineness. Your partner has a built-in radar to detect phoniness, spotting fabricated feelings and insincere intentions long before they're openly expressed. Your partner will not trust you if he or she feels you are not genuine. Okay? So that means you think you're getting away with it. Your partner probably knows that you're faking it. Okay? What you say to your partner is far less important than how you say it, with a smile, a shrug, a frown, or a glare. Okay? So if I say to Cody, I just love you, that sounds pretty aggressive. Okay? But if I'm like, hey Cody, man, I love you, dude, that feels a lot better. So it depends on how you say something to your spouse, not necessarily what you say. Okay? You can tell your spouse that you love them in the most hateful, evil voice every single day, and they're not going to feel loved. It matters how you say it. Okay? Consider this. Nonverbal communication accounts for 58% of the total message. Tone of voice makes up 35% of the message. The actual words you say account for only 7% of the total message. Okay? So your nonverbal communication, your body language, how you say it, the volume level, okay, your tone, that makes up the majority of what you're communicating. Only 7% of the total message that your spouse receives is made up by the words that you say. Okay, so tone, body language, those things are important. Genuineness is expressed in your tone and nonverbal behavior, your eyes and your posture. And research has found that husband and wives are very accurate interpreters of their spouse's nonverbal communication, right? So your spouse can read your body language probably better than you can read your body language, which means if you're sitting there like this and you don't realize it, your spouse does. And they're not very happy with it, I'm sure. Okay? Authenticity is something you are, not something you do. Okay? You are authentic, you don't do authenticity. It comes from the heart, not the hands. That's why it's one of our core values as a church. We strive for authenticity because we want to create a safe place where we are vulnerable and honest with each other. So, if you're having a bad day, don't show your partner with the body language. Communicate to your partner, having a bad day. I'm sorry, if you speak with a grumpy attitude, then apologize. I'm sorry I spoke with a grumpy attitude. It was a stressful day at work. Whatever it is, your body language, your tone, your nonverbal cues are extremely important. And it's extremely important in a marriage for you to be authentic and honest and vulnerable with your spouse. Okay? The next one is empathy. The best way to avoid stepping on your spouse's toes is to put yourself in his or her shoes. That's empathy. It's seeing the world from your spouse's perspective. Everyone interprets life from a composite of unique insights and perceptions. Life looks very different for your spouse than it does for us. Yet we tend to assume that he or she sees life the way we see it. Okay? The way I approach life and look at life is far different than the way Kelly does. Based on my upbringing, based on my life circumstances, based on a number of factors, I see life much differently. Okay? The problem is, a lot of times when we have communication breakdowns, it's because we assume our spouse sees life the way we do. And most often, they do not. Okay? So, to look at life through the same lens means you're asking yourself these two questions. What does this situation, problem, or event look or feel like from my partner's perspective? And how is his or her perception different from mine? So when you're approaching a disagreement, a discussion, an argument, a situation, you need to ask yourself this question. What does this situation, problem, or event look like or feel like from my partner's perspective? And how is his or her perception different from mine? I'll give you an example. If Kelly's having a bad day at work, something happens, she's probably going to be upset about it. Frustrated, upset, something. I am not, because I don't work at her work. I don't know her coworkers well enough to have any personal emotional attachment to how she feels. Okay? And so when she comes to me with a problem, it's like, I'm so frustrated about this at work, it does no good for me to be careless or cavalier with my emotions towards it, because very clearly she is upset or frustrated about the situation. So it's important for me to look at that situation and go, okay, how is this problem making Kelly feel? How is she looking at this problem, and how is her perception different than mine? Okay? Empathy is perhaps the toughest work of building a strong marriage, because most of us are wired to either use our head or our heart more than the other. And so it takes a conscious effort to empathize. It requires us to use our head and our heart equally. More often than not, we use one or more ourselves. Loving with our heart alone is only sympathizing, while loving with our head alone is simply analyzing. Empathy, however, brings both of these together so we can be sympathetic and analytic, both our heart and our head, to fully understand our partner. And empathy always involves risk. Accurately understanding your partner's hurts and their hopes is going to change you. And the benefit of taking that risk far outweighs the disadvantages of not being empathetic. The bedrock of communication is being secure in who you are as a person, and it's in being warm, genuine, and empathetic towards your spouse. So we're going to do a little activity today. It's called listening with your third ear. So I want you to pull this out, and you're going to do this activity with your spouse. Okay? You're going to have some examples that you're going to work through, and you're going to try to empathize with the situation. And then on the back, there's information on how to score. Okay? All right. So now that you've practiced some reflective listening, hopefully you are better at understanding and listening for feelings in your partner. The point of reflective listening is to let your partner know that you've heard what they've said and you understand their message. Reflective listening is a great way to diffuse a potential conflict. It requires you to genuinely expose your understanding of your spouse's feelings. So you need to listen for the message that is underlying the actual words that they're saying. When you offer your spouse the gift of listening, you're embodying what marriage is meant to be. So we're going to look back at page 12 of our SYMBIS assessment. You're going to see at the very bottom there are 3 communication skills that you have said that you want to improve. So I want you to take some time to explain to your spouse why you chose these items and what you will do in practical terms to improve them. Okay? So why did you choose the 3 that you chose? And what are you going to do in practical terms to actually improve on these skills? All right. Well, while who you are is more important than what you do in the area of communication, there are some important skills that you can learn. All the important communication tools that you can learn can be reduced down to 6 basic skills. If you learn them and use them, you will be able to give more love to your spouse, and your marriage will become supercharged with positive energy. Here's what they are. Number 1, make I statements, not you statements. Number 2, practice reflective listening. That's what we were just doing. Number 3, understand and accept the differences between men and women. Newsflash, men and women are different. Okay? Number 4, apologize when necessary. Number 5, power down and get offline. And number 6, communicate through touch. So we're going to look at each one of these individually. We're going to start with make I statements, not you statements. A you statement guarantees a relational barrier. Your partner has virtually no alternative when you make a you statement than to feel blamed, accused, and criticized. Volleying you statements is a surefire way to spoil an evening. I statements dispense information to be understood rather than accusations to be defended. I statements are much more likely to elicit concern and caring from your partner. I statements do not cause defensiveness because they say nothing about how bad your spouse is, because there's no benefit to making your spouse feel attacked. So before your sentences, or begin your sentences with I rather than you, and you're going to save your marriage quite a bit of misery. Communication is not what you say, but what your partner understands by what you say. When you make you statements, all your partner hears is blame and criticism. I statements are much more effective because they allow your message to be correctly heard and understood. So something Kelly and I say all the time to couples that we counsel is this: what your spouse hears is truth, whether it's truth or not. Okay? So if I say something and I say, I feel like this, my feelings are true to me, whether it's actually true or not. So if I feel grumpy, or the grumpy's not a great example. If I feel frustrated about a situation, even though that situation should not be or is not frustrating, my feelings are true to me. So I'm going to say a statement that I would never use in any context other than this particular context. Your feelings are your truth, even if they're not true. Okay? So when you're talking with your spouse and your spouse says something, I feel like this, that is true to them, even if it's not actually true, because it's how they feel. Okay? So you might be dealing with something that's not true, but to them it is. The same is true of you statements. If you say, you are so lazy, your spouse thinks you're lazy. Whether it's true that you're lazy or not, that is how they feel. And how they feel is true to them, whether it's true or not. Okay? So you need to practice I statements. Okay? The next one is this: reflective listening. We often think about learning good communication skills as learning to express ourselves more clearly to get our message across. However, 98% of good communication is listening. Okay? So when we say we want you to communicate better, we often think, okay, I need to be more clear. I need to learn how to express myself more clearly. No. When we say you want to communicate better, we really mean you need to listen better. Most communication breakdowns come from poor listening. If you can hear, you can listen, right? Wrong. Hearing is passive. Listening is actively interacting with a message by reflecting it back to the sender. Okay. Hearing is passive. Listening is actively interacting with a message by reflecting it back to the sender. Effective listening is a simple habit to develop, but can be difficult to learn. Because situations where it's most important, we're usually not focusing on, or we're usually focusing more on what we're going to say next, rather than listening to the message that's being sent. The point of reflective listening is to let your partner know that you have heard what they've said and you understand the message they're communicating. listening for the message underlying the actual words are always, actual words is important. Things like, "You are always late," really means, "I'm upset." Now, usually you can tell that based on tone, body language, things like that. Many couples we teach reflective listening to complain that it feels awkward and sounds phony or patronizing when we go through these listening activities. That's why we have to lay the foundation first of being warm, genuine, and empathetic. When reflective listening is grounded in these traits, it's not robotic, but comes from the heart. Like any new skill, listening is going to feel awkward at first. But when you begin to experience the difference that it makes in your marriage, the awkward feeling will quickly leave. True empathy is listening that involves change. If your partner is asking for a change in your behavior, then you need to seriously consider the request, and then if it seems reasonable, act on it. Just as words without deeds are dead, so is listening without action. So if you're really going to be empathetic and understand what life is like from your spouse's shoes, it's going to involve you having to change things about yourself. Change is good. As a born-again believer, you are responsible for changing every single day. You should look more like Jesus today than you did yesterday. Tomorrow you should look more like Jesus than you did today. Change should be a daily thing that you are used to doing. So when your partner is saying something that requires you to change, you need to act upon that change. If you're at a loss and can't seem to reflect your partner's message, there's two things you can do. You can make sure that you really want to accurately understand the message, and then you can always say something like, "Tell me more about it," or "Help me understand what you mean." So, if you're struggling to understand what your spouse is saying, then it's helpful for you to stop and go, do I actually care what they're communicating to me? Am I actually trying to understand what they're saying? Or am I thinking about how I'm going to respond to what they're saying to me? And if you still don't understand, then you can ask clarifying questions. Tell me more about that. Help me understand what you mean. Okay? No one can develop freely in this world and find a full life without feeling understood by at least one person. So, we've created a workbook exercise for you this week called "I Can Hear Clearly Now." Okay? This activity is going to help you be better at listening. Now, the next concept, the next tool that you can use to have better communication is understand and accept the differences between men and women. We're going to talk about this a lot next week. But almost every man and every woman has at some point desired or despaired over not getting through to the opposite sex. They're just not understanding me. Men and women are very different. Okay? While our roles can be changed, our psyches cannot. And even though the other sex's behavior is different from ours, it's not wrong, okay? Your spouse sees the world differently than you do. Their behavior is different than yours because they are a different person, they are a different gender, and the way they think, feel, and act is different than the way you think, feel, and act. That doesn't make it wrong, it makes it different. So we've got to learn to accept our differences and quit railing against them. We've got to change our expectations and actually begin to accept each other. Accepting each other's differences is a vital key to effective communication. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example. Women use conversation primarily, this is a generalization, women use conversation primarily to form and solidify connections with other people. Men, on the other hand, tend to use words to navigate their way within the hierarchy by communicating their knowledge and skill and imparting information. Okay? So women usually communicate, the way they communicate is to form and solidify connections that they have with other people. Men tend to communicate by expelling knowledge and skill and trying to impart new information. Women excel at what linguist Deborah Tannen calls rapport talk. Men feel most comfortable with report talk. Okay? Conversationally speaking, women share feelings and men solve problems. Okay? Now that's not an indictment on men or women. That is how we communicate. More often than not, when you're talking to your spouse, if they're your wife, they're communicating how they feel. More often than not, men are trying to fix the problem that their wife is trying to share their feelings about. Okay? Now, there are exceptions. This is a generalization. But the reality is, when you realize that the two of you are in different modes, it's important to label this a fix-it or feel-it conversation. So when your spouse is complaining about something, you should ask the question, is this a fix-it or feel-it? If it's a feel-it conversation, you don't need to share your opinion on how to fix it. Okay? More often than not, if it's a feel-it conversation, once your spouse has felt it, then you're going to have an opportunity later to share how to fix it. Or they'll share with you how they think they should fix it to get your opinion on it. Okay? If it's a fix-it situation and you're coming to your spouse and you're saying, honey, I need to fix this problem, don't be surprised if they don't want to talk about the feelings. Okay? If you're trying to fix it, it's not going to be a feel-it type conversation. When we understand how our spouse communicates and how they are different than us, and how we can label discussions, fix-it or feel-it conversations, we actually begin to honor both styles of communication in our marriage, and we validate our partner's communication gifts. Okay? This next one's hard for many people. Apologize when necessary. Within a marriage, an apology to your partner that is sincerely meant is much more than a civility. It can be a powerful tool for resolving issues and strengthening your relationships. Now, sometimes apologizing is perfectly straightforward. When one partner blows it and the offense is minor, a graceful apology is all it takes for the incident to be dropped. At other times, apologies can be surprisingly complicated. Sometimes, apologies can be used as a tool of manipulation, as a way to get off the hook and avoid the real issue. What's worse, a premature apology often and blocks a real opportunity for change. So many times when we are apologizing because our spouse is upset with us, we're like, I'm sorry. And that's because we don't really want to deal with the issue that we're going through. We don't want to actually work on the situation. And when we apologize too quickly, it actually blocks real change in our marriage, and we end up fighting about the same things over and over again. Now, true apologies in marriage can happen only when the partners come to understand accountability. That is another way of saying that each of you takes responsibility of your own behavior and acknowledge that your partner's point of view is different than yours, and at times it means owning up to things about yourself that you don't like. Okay? So when it comes to apologizing to your partner, you have to accept the fact that your responsibility for your behavior in the situation. You also have to acknowledge your partner's perspective on the situation. And more often than not, you're going to have to own up to what you did wrong. You have to own up to the things that you don't like about yourself. All couples need a healing mechanism, a way to turn a new page in their marriage, and knowing how and when to say you're sorry can make a big difference. A sincere apology leaves the couple with a renewed closeness and a relieved feeling that all is well. Okay? The next one is one that we probably struggle with the most in our culture. It's power down and get offline. Couples who engage in discussions with their phones nearby, even if they're not actually using their phone, report lower relationship quality and feel their partner is less empathetic to their concerns. Consider this. 34% of couples admit to answering their phones during intimate moments. That one was pretty surprising. 34% of couples answer their phone during intimate moments. 20% of people would rather go shoeless for a week than take a break from their phone. 65% of people, what? 20% of people would rather go shoeless for a week than take a break from their phones. Not wear shoes for a week than give up your phone for a week. 65% of people sleep next to their phones. How many of you sleep next to your phone? Yeah. Okay, so like 90% of the people in this room. Okay? Experts point to the fact that our gadgets provide a sense of instant gratification that stimulates our brain's reward centers. So what can you do? Okay? Well, for starters, phones are best kept out of sight and out of mind when you're having an important conversation, when you're sharing a meal, and when it's date nights. In other words, bite the bullet and turn off your phone. Okay? I know it's tough, but if you make a habit of not having your phone sit on the table during meals, not having your phone during date night, not having your phone out when you're trying to have an important conversation, it's going to reap incredible conversations in your marriage. Okay? Kelly and I did this weekend. We were out of town on Friday night, and I told the entire staff and elders, don't call me. I'm not going to answer my phone. Okay? We had a great night, and I didn't get any phone calls. Right? But it's important, and it's something that many of us feel like we cannot do because our phones are so important in our lives. But experts recommend even keeping and charging your phones in a completely different room than your bedroom, so it doesn't impair intimacy. The bottom line is this: interacting without a phone nearby helps to foster closeness, connectedness, interpersonal trust, and perceptions of empathy, which are the building blocks of good communication. The last one is this: communicate through touch. In the last 20 years, research has helped us recognize how much infants need to be held and touched. When we grow up, the need for physical connection does not go away. And when we meet this need for our spouse, we can increase the health of our marriage. Physical contact is a powerful means of communicating and a gentle and supportive way to nourish the spirit and convey positive emotions in your relationship. Technically speaking, the human skin is connected with millions of nerve endings called touch receptors. And when these touch receptors are touched, your brain actually receives a message and it secretes chemicals that are supportive to the situation. In many marriages, though, touching wanes the longer you've been married, especially after kids come along. The pace of life quickens. Touching is often only reserved for sex. Purely affectionate touching, except for little pats and quick kisses, may get left behind. So, another question you have to ask yourself when it comes to touch is, how do you receive or express your love through touch when you were younger? Because how you receive and express love through touch is actually taught at a very young age. So, was your family high contact or low contact? My family was a low contact family. We didn't hug, we didn't kiss, we didn't generally touch much at all. Okay? So, as a married person, those are things that I don't do well. I need to be intentional about holding my wife's hand, giving hugs to my kids, those sorts of things, because it is not how I was raised. All research shows a direct relationship between how you experience touch, or how you experience touching as an adult, and how often it is all relates to how you were touched as a child. It's important for us to explore our spouse's comfort zones because both of you probably have different preferred amounts and kinds of touching. Studies even show that some men, when they're feeling down, they actually feel insecure and they interpret touching as a type of put down rather than a source of comfort. So it's important for you to understand how your spouse was raised, what their childhood was like, so you understand how to help communicate through touch effectively. So the next time you're at a loss for words, remember touching may be the best way to speak to your partner. So, we don't have time to do this last activity, but it is an activity that Kelly and I do with pretty much every married couple that we sit down with. It's called listening well. So you have an additional handout. If you've done marriage counseling with us, you probably recognize this handout because we use it all the time. Listening well is a great opportunity for you to learn how to actually hear what your spouse is saying and not just listen passively. Okay, a couple things as we wrap up. You've got workbook exercises. There's videos that we dropped in the app. There's an additional activity, that listening well activity for you to do. There's an extra question sheet for you to explore. And then there's this commitment to connect sheet from one of our ministry partners called Marriage 365. I want to encourage you to spend some time looking through this and talking about it this week. These are some basically 10 commandments of communication. We will not threaten divorce. We will not withdraw or isolate emotionally. We will not use the words never or always. We will not use you statements. We will not assume the worst of each other. We will not interrupt each other. We will not blame or shame. We will not criticize. We will not name call, label, or belittle. And we will not make demands. Okay? If you can practice these 10 commandments of commitment and communication, you'll find that your relationship is far better. Okay? Another thing I would encourage you to do, which is the reason why we always provide you an extra question sheet, is to just spend time this week talking to your spouse. One of the best things that Kelly and I did when we were first dating and we went through premarital counseling was we were given a book called Love Talk Starters, which I could not find. I have one that's similar that we received a few years ago. It's 101 more conversation starters for couples. Okay? Keeping this in the glove box of your car, when you stop at a traffic light, you're driving a long distance or whatever, and pulling it out and just asking these questions. They're not questions about your relationship at all. They're just conversation starters. Like this one is, if you could be on the cover of any magazine, which would it be, and what would be the caption or the headline? Okay? This conversation is not going to be very meaningful to actually solve any disagreement or discussion that you have in your marriage. But what this conversation will do is help you better learn your spouse. Okay? If you can learn who your spouse is, what they like, what they don't like, and you have a better rapport with your spouse because you know these simple, insignificant details, you will have a much better relationship, and your communication skills will grow through simple, silly questions that you ask each other in the car. All right? So, when you leave this place, go communicate with your spouse. Don't ride home in silence. Don't sit at the dinner table in silence. Actually talk to them about anything. Important things, if you need to talk about important things, but just communicate. Because if you will just start communicating, I promise you, the big things you need to communicate will get easier to talk about if you talk about the little things that are not really important. All right? I'm going to pray and then we'll be dismissed. God, thank you for tonight. Thank you for an opportunity for us to gather together and learn how to improve our marriages. God, this area of communication is such an important, vital part of our marriages and just our lives in general. We can learn how to communicate better in a way that honors you and honors our spouse, then we will have a much more healthy, successful, thriving marriage. So God, as we leave this place, I pray for fruitful conversations. Pray for opportunities to talk about unimportant things and the important things. God, we pray that we bless you and honor you in our communication with our spouse, and that you get the glory in our marriage. In Jesus'